And we're live. It is May Day, Friday, May 1st, 2020, 5 o'clock p.m. All right, we got weird news about our fearless leaders. Boris Johnson.
We measure time in Boris
magazine,
Johnson's.
Boris Johnson, Forbes reported today, has just welcomed a son, as we knew. But how many children he has in total remains a mystery. Meanwhile, Fox News reports that North Korean defector turned lawmaker 99% sure Kim Jong-un is dead, but the New York Post reports that Kim Jong-un may be holed up with his 2,000-woman pleasure squad. We're not allowed to have fun anymore, but in lieu of fun, we're going to do something really unfun. We're going to talk about state finances. And we have a fun person in lieu of fun to talk about state finances with. Seth Magaziner is the general treasurer of the smallest state with the longest name in the country, the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. Welcome to In Lieu of Fun.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. As I said before we started, I have only a vague idea of what this show is, but Kate and I have known each other since we were in college, and she has material that could end my political career, so here I am.
Let's start with what you've got on her and what she's got on you, because you brought it up, man.
Man.
So,
we just were texting.
Destruction, right? So yes, mutually assured destruction. So we're not
embarrassing Kate stories. Go.
You're allowed to tell two. I gave you clearance on 2 stories, Seth.
Which one? Those weren't very good though. Which ones were they?
I liked those ones. That was I was training. Well, that was when we went to a fundraiser.
We were at. Oh, that's right. When Bill
funny.
Clinton was there.
Yeah.
And Kate was training for a marathon.
We were sitting at the table. They were sitting at a table, I think, next to Bill Clinton and a lot of fancy people, and it was very fancy food. And we were I was 20, right? I think we're both.
And training for a marathon, so you were hungry all the time. And you ate 3 steaks. You take other people's foods off of their plate.
It was
Did you eat off of Bill Clinton's plate?
I ate off the person next to him's plate. I was is someone eating that? And I just took it.
Shamelessly.
No one ate it.
Embarrassing Seth story. Go.
Oh, God. I was told not to tell any of these, but no, I don't know if I have any. Well, I actually totally do, but they're not appropriate for there's all of them are mostly me being embarrassed. Oh, yeah. I had to tutor Seth in nutrition. He was taking nutrition his senior year. It was the only science class that he took.
Yeah, I somehow managed to get all the way through high school and most of college without taking a single science class.
Yeah.
Where did you go to high school?
So there are no rules.
We went to Milton. It's not even a bad high school. It's a really good high school.
Yeah. And then I took my first science class as a senior in college and had no idea what I was doing and would have failed if Kate had not helped me through. But these are not good stories though. People are already.
Yes, but I was really angry at you for not knowing anything about science. I was
That's true. You were unusually angry that I didn't know how molecules worked. It offended you personally.
You didn't know an atom.
Whatever. That's more on you
different than a molecule. Anyways, it was a very, I was the angriest tutor in biology. Yeah. So anyways, yes, these are boring stories, but we'll think
in other words, I'm going to be, throughout the course of this, just giving you a tour of Rhode Island as well.
Well, that's Block Island.
State with the biggest heart.
That is about Block Island.
I think it's also backwards, so it's hard for me to tell. I think this is Newport.
Oh,
really?
Is it?
Yeah, see the mansions and stuff, the fancy.
Oh,
yeah, but.
Oh yeah.
We all live in mansions in Rhode Island.
Oh, but a cool fact about Seth is that he's was born in Bristol, Rhode Island, raised in Bristol, Rhode Island, and which is the longest 4th of July parade.
Most patriotic town in the country. We have the oldest.
My dad is from Rhode Island, but not from Bristol. Yeah.
Bristol has the oldest continuous. Oh, Woonsocket is awesome. Woonsocket.
No.
First of all,
You
I'm
have to say
constitutionally
that.
obligated to love every city and town in Rhode Island, but no, Woonsocket's great. It's got a great culture. It's a a French Canadian town, and like there's still like people there. Oh yeah, like there's still people there who speak French as a first language. It's a very culturally rich city.
Well,
Yeah.
my father's family were Ashkenazic Jews, not French Canadians, and my dad went to classical high school in Providence, and but is a Rhode Island native.
Nice.
We knew a ton of people from classical.
Yeah, I have a classical T-shirt as well.
So, how bad is the fiscal situation in Rhode Island?
I mean, it's been better. It's been better. No, I mean, listen, these are obviously challenging times and unprecedented times that we're living in. And I don't know that there's ever been a time in the history of our country where economic activity slowed down as sharply and as quickly as it has now. And the speed of it is what's really amazing, right? So, we're probably already past Great Recession levels of unemployment, but it took several months for the unemployment rate to build up during the Great Recession. And it took several months for, state deficits to manifest themselves. And so to have a situation where economic activity just grinds to a sudden halt the way it has is really unprecedented. And so, from a state budget point of view, all of our revenue, or a large portion of our revenue, just dried up instantly, and it made for a very stressful situation in March and in early April in particular. And we're starting to work through it now and find solutions, but it's been intense for sure. And
so before you go into that, what is Rhode Island's fiscal normalcy like? Like, what percentage of state revenues comes from income taxes? What percentage of it comes from other stuff? Federal monies? Like, what does your normal asset picture look like?
Yeah. So about half of our revenue comes from the federal government. The other half, our largest sources of state generated revenue in order are income tax, sales tax is number 2, and then lottery and casino revenue is number 3. And so for us, it was sort of the perfect storm. Income tax is our biggest source of state generated revenue. And, usually that means that March and April are big revenue months for us. And with the extension of the income tax filing deadline, that disappeared. And then sales tax, obviously, we took a big hit, and, the casino shut down. And so our 3 largest sources of revenue basically dried up all at once. But states all over the country are dealing with similar things, right? I was talking with some people I know who are state officials in Oklahoma, where they watch the price of oil, and like that has a big impact on their state revenue. And so they're really hurting. But like to have, on a percentage basis, I think it's too early to know whether this decline in revenue, how it'll compare to other recessions. But like the speed with which it happened was just totally unprecedented.
So how typical is Rhode Island? I kind of want to use this conversation as a, Rhode Island, we're talking about Rhode Island because that's where you happen to be the state treasurer. But to what extent is Rhode Island a typical state for purposes of this conversation, that you can kind of, it's small, but the problems are basically no different. You're going to have more casino revenues and less oil and gas revenues. You're going to have, more, like, different states have different revenue pictures. But to what extent should we assume that this is playing out 50 times? Everything we talk about is basically happening in every state.
100%. I talk with other state treasurers multiple times a week, and we're all facing the same situation, like just really significant fiscal stress all over the country. And, at a time when we're also being called on to address a significant public health crisis and to spend money on health and safety and all that. In a lot of ways, the administration has basically said, hey, states, it's on you. You're on your own to go and find ventilators and find PPE and find, all of this stuff. And so, states were having to bid against each other for medical supplies, which just drives up the cost of these supplies.
That's completely insane. Like that's just, I hadn't thought about that like,
oh, yeah.
that this would create like a 50 state bidding war.
That's exactly what's happened. Like, instead of the federal government using its massive purchasing power and its massive authority to order factories to make things, and instead of doing that and procuring equipment and then sending it to the hot spots where it's needed the most, they basically said, "Oh, states, it's up to you." And the states are bidding against each other for like life-saving medical supplies. And it's especially hard for small states like Rhode Island, right? Because we don't have as much purchasing power. And so we're really having to hustle to buy like surgical gowns and masks and all kinds of stuff. And we're competing with New York and California and Italy and the rest of the world. It's insane.
Can you like can you like team up with like neighboring states to kind of like get percentages, right? Like, why aren't you talking to Mass, like, and like teaming up with Mass, and like you, Mass and Maine might be able to like pool more resources and then split them based on like the number of cases? Or
there's some of that happening, but it's tough, right? Because I think each governor is finding, each governor would say it's their responsibility to take care of their own state first, right? And so there's some cooperation going on, but to be honest, like, I think there's more cooperation happening around discussions about when to reopen things than there is about purchasing at this stage.
Do you
but
have
it's all
any
totally
role in that?
haphazard.
Are
in
you
the reopening?
in the reopening conversations?
Not as much. I'm in the loop on them because they have a fiscal impact that we have to estimate and track, but we leave the healthcare decisions to the healthcare experts, which, as you know from my college science experience, I am not.
No, you're not. So Ben, do you have a question?
No.
Otherwise,
go ahead.
Okay. We were talking about this on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and we were like just talking about how different states have treasurers and some don't have treasurers at all. And I don't expect you to necessarily know the answer to this, but one, like what are like kind of the determinant, why did they make that choice? Like, what's the pluses and minuses of having a designated person as the general treasurer? And then like two, like how is that is having a separate treasurer playing out differently for the purposes of something like COVID? Like if like New York, all of it is just the governor, right? Like all of that is just controlled by Cuomo. Like what does it mean if there's separate, like someone who's a treasurer versus someone who's something else?
Yeah,
and maybe you should pause. Maybe you should pause before you answer that and explain what the treasurer of the state actually does.
Yeah, these are good questions because it's not uniform at all, and like nobody knows, right? Like, so when I was running for treasurer the first time in 2014, we had a campaign and we were doing polls, as you do in a campaign. And we were asking questions, what do you want to see in a state treasurer? What's a strong candidate for state treasurer look like to you? And then we kind of stopped and we said, well, let's just put in a question. What does the state treasurer do? Nobody knows, nobody knows. So the answer is this, it really varies significantly from state to state. There are some states like Michigan and Massachusetts where it's a very expansive role and where they do everything from, manage the state budget, run the lottery. In Massachusetts, the treasurer regulates gambling and alcohol and like marijuana for some reason. And they have like hundreds and hundreds of employees. And then there are other states where there's like 6 employees and all they do is like manage the bank accounts. And so it really varies state to state. In Rhode Island, we're, I'd say, more toward the expansive end of the spectrum. So in Rhode Island, my responsibilities are to manage all the state's investments. So we manage the state pension fund, we manage, the state college savings program, we manage basically $15 billion of state assets, state's cash, which again was close to running out, but now luckily for at least the time being, it's not. We manage the bondings, like all the borrowing that the state does. We're basically like almost like a CFO, I guess, in Rhode Island.
But are you responsible for the budget?
No. So in Rhode Island, the budget is the governor and the legislature. So I don't have as much of a role there. But again, like one of the things that's neat about being state treasurer is because the general public doesn't really know what the treasurer does, it's kind of a good platform to talk about any financial issue. So I'll certainly weigh in publicly and use my soapbox, all the time about what I think should or shouldn't be in the budget.
So another question. You said the state was about to run out of cash. I assume that was, you said in March and April. What happened and where did the cash infusion come from? I mean, did somebody like walk into Providence with like giant bags of cash and like pass them off to you in a parking lot?
Yes, and I counted every bill myself.
Good.
This is exactly what I expect out of Rhode Island.
Because I really did want it to happen that way.
They hide them in jars of tomato sauce.
we have money hidden all over the place. You just don't know about it. No. So our biggest source of state generated revenue is the income tax, and our problem there is basically delayed, right? So we know that most of that income tax money is still going to come in, but just not until July. But we need it now, right? So for like revenue that we know is coming, it's just been delayed, we can borrow against that, and that's what we had to do. So we got authority. This was the first time it had been done in state history. There's this like weird part of state law in Rhode Island that I didn't even know existed, that nobody knew about, that says if the legislature can't meet and there's a crisis, you can convene a disaster funding board that has 4 people on it. It's like the leaders of each chamber of the state legislature, and those 4 people can give us the authorization to borrow money or to move money in order to deal with the crisis. And so that board convened, I think, for the first time ever, and they gave us authority to borrow a few $100 million. And so that's what we did. We borrowed some money against the income tax that's going to come in July. And then the second thing that came.
What's the interest rate on like a couple $100 million right now? Honestly,
I mean, remarkably low, lower than my mortgage. It's floating rate, but like in the low to mid 1%, like between 1% and 2% range. And then the other thing that happened is that finally, after a number of weeks, federal stimulus money started to come in. But that's actually an interesting story, and that's something that we should talk about, because the way that Congress designed the federal stimulus for states is frankly very unhelpful. And so we've got a lot of money sitting in an account right now, and it's very hard for us to use it. But that also has helped to some extent. It could help a lot more if they would loosen the rules, but.
Let's come to that in a minute, but we have a question from Tony Cava. Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, guys. And I am looking forward to hearing Seth's comments about reopening. I live in Washington State and have a lot of faith in our governor, Inslee, and I'm in no rush to get back myself, and I don't feel like people should be forced to get back. Having said that, my question is about earlier today, I think you tweeted about the census, and you said that the best thing you could do to help respond to COVID-19 was to answer the census. So my question to you, and not to get too political or conspiratorial about it, but with Wilbur Ross in charge of that, do you have confidence that the census will be counted fairly? I have a question to everyone. Is there an IG in place to monitor the census and the count? And do the states, Rhode Island and maybe some other places, have any sort of strategy in place to be sure that the census is fairly counted?
So first, that's a great question. But first of all, I want to ask Seth, why do you think, if you do, that that the best way people can respond to COVID-19 is to answer the census?
I think I said one of the best ways, just to be clear, but it is.
Okay.
So I won't commit to best way, but it is a very good way, because the census is one of the ways that federal funding is allocated, right? Like billions and billions of dollars of economic development money, healthcare, healthcare funds, education funding, I mean, is allocated like based on census results, right? And so again, for a small state like Rhode Island, I should also mention, Rhode Island, we're right on the cusp where we may or may not lose a House seat, depending on how the census turns out. And so for Rhode Island in particular, it makes a very significant difference in how much funding we can receive, that we have a high response rate in the census.
And that would be, if my house geography is not great, would go take you from 2 to 1.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a big representational difference if it happens.
Yeah, it is. And so, we have spent a fair amount of money in Rhode Island, that was in the state budget, marketing the census basically, because the federal government is, as you know, pulled way back on actually marketing it. And in particular, we're worried that, people in immigrant communities are going to be undercounted. Certainly undocumented communities are going to be undercounted. And, the census, as you all know the Constitution well. I mean, it's every person. It's not necessarily every citizen, right? And so it's really important that everyone be counted. And so we put a lot of effort behind that in Rhode Island, but we're worried about it. And obviously the virus doesn't help.
Right, although it does make people easier to find.
Maybe, yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think when people are less mobile, it's easier to identify people and track people down. And we're all less mobile right now.
Oh, yeah. There's like people are not moving out of state. But on the other side of that, like, well, I guess that's true. But like, I don't know. Like, I feel like most people are filling this out online, right?
Yeah, but then like, census workers are, I assume, going to still have to go knock door to door. And how's that going to be received in an era when people are trying to social distance? Like, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. You just yell from like 8 feet outside the house and throw some rocks.
We're in this house. So talk to us about, let's nerd out on the.
Oh, hold
problem.
on. He didn't answer Tony's question about whether he trusted.
Oh, you're right.
The census.
Yeah.
I want to know the answer to that.
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that. I mean, they better. There's nothing that like would be too terrible that we could not possibly imagine this administration doing it, or like, so like, could they try to fudge the numbers? I mean, in normal times we'd say no, but this is not a normal administration. So I think this is almost a time in our history where you have to be paranoid, right? About what the White House is going to do. I don't know.
No.
So let's talk about that money that Congress appropriated that's sitting in an account that you can't access without some kind of relaxation of the rules. Number one, what is that? What's driving that situation? What are the rules that are creating that situation? And number two, in Washington, Democrats are talking about a 4th round of appropriations aimed at state and local government. How important is that to you guys? And what happens if Mitch McConnell doesn't do it?
Yeah, and this is a big deal, and this is something that I think just perfectly encapsulates how stupid the Republicans in Congress can be. So in the CARES Act, which was the big federal stimulus, the 3rd stimulus bill, with the big one, the CARES Act back in March, they allocated $150 billion to states and to cities to help with the COVID-19 crisis, which is great. Not enough, but great. But they said, Congress was silent on it in the legislation, but the administration interpreted it to say that money could only be used for expenses related to the virus and not to offset lost revenue. And so we can use it to pay for ventilators and hospital beds and all of that. But our biggest fiscal challenge at the state level, and this is not just Rhode Island, this is like every state, the biggest fiscal challenge is not increased expenses, it's lost revenue. It's that lost income tax and sales tax, and if you're Oklahoma, oil revenue or whatever. And so, like in Rhode Island, for example, we were given $1.25 billion, which for Rhode Island is a lot of money, but we're not going to spend $1.25 billion on ventilators. Like, what we need is to be able to offset our lost revenues. And so, the worst thing that we could do in a recession where we likely already have 15 to 20% unemployment, like the worst thing that we could do is force states and cities to lay off millions of teachers and firefighters and, office clerks and just put more people on unemployment. Like, that's the worst thing you could do economically.
Not to mention to sit on large caches of money that could be injected into the economy.
Right. And so, Democrats are pushing for more money for states and cities, but are also pushing for more flexibility in how we can use it. Let us use it to offset our lost revenues so that we can maintain a baseline level of service, and don't, play these games and say, well, you can only spend it on increased revenue, increased expenses and not lost revenue. And when I say Democrats, I mean, I should say in Congress, right? Because at the state level, I talk to state treasurers, as I said, all the time. And like, Republican state treasurers get it. Republican governors mostly get it. And so, I think Congress is eventually going to do the right thing. Like, I think Mitch McConnell is going to cave, and I think even he's signaled that a little bit. But there's this kind of dance going on where now they're trying to figure out, well, what can we get for it, right? And Trump is already saying, oh yeah, we'll give states that flexibility if you are more restrictive on immigration and like, stuff like that. We're in the game playing phase of this.
Fair enough. We have a question from Jeff Brancato. If I got your name right, if I didn't, I apologize. The floor is yours.
Oh, thanks so much. You did get it right. So maybe this is not quite so germane given the scope of your responsibilities, Seth, but can you talk a little bit more about the financial situation for K through 12 education and public higher education in Rhode Island?
Yeah. So K through 12, again, there was some stimulus money that was allocated. So I think K through 12 funding should be an easier problem to solve. Like, school districts are having to spend money to transition to remote learning, right? Like buying laptops for kids or tablets or, whatever, hotspots if they're families that don't have internet access. And most of that should be reimbursable by the feds. So like, most of that I think is okay. Higher ed is a much tougher problem, right? So colleges and universities have already had to reimburse for room and board for the spring semester, which for a lot of them is like a big chunk of money. And if students can't come back in the fall, like it's deadly. Like, it's absolutely deadly for colleges and universities. And so, again, there was some funding in the CARES Act for universities, not a ton. And so, yeah, like I do worry about it. I mean, speaking of Brown, Kate and my alma mater, Christina Paxson, who's the president of Brown, had an op-ed in the New York Times, I think yesterday, where she basically said, like, students are going to have to come back in the fall, and colleges are going to have to find a way to deal with it, whether it's getting rid of large lectures or whether it's, certain housing arrangements to like promote social distancing. But, the Browns and the Harvards of the world might be fine, but a lot of other colleges, if they can't bring students back in the fall, it's going to be bad.
What about the public universities, Seth?
Same. Yeah. I mean, same. I mean, unfortunately, like nationally, and you all know this better than I do, because you all are, or Kate at least works for a college, but like, state support for public universities nationally has declined a lot, like over the last few decades. And so University of Rhode Island, maybe 10% of their budget comes from the state.
Oh, is that true? I didn't realize that it was that low.
Yeah, and like much of the rest of the country, even like the really big public university systems, like the California system, like maybe it used to be 60%, but now it's probably half that, right? And so they're all relying more and more on tuition and room and board. And And so it's scary stuff.
My dean, for what it's worth, my dean just sent an email. The dean of the law school, anyway, not the university, just kind of like to all faculty email. That was just kind of like, there are three options. We don't come back and we do online teaching. We come back and everything's normal. Oh, hey, look, it's Brown, Van Wickle Gates. Or the third option, and he was like, by far the most likely option is what Seth just said, which is that everyone has to come back and basically the schools have to figure out a way to teach within the parameters that are set out by the government for social distancing.
And to like try to prevent all of those kids from going to parties somehow.
Yes, well, that seems...
Right. Good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. Like...
Seriously though, like that's, you know. Yeah.
Well, you can social distance and hotbox an entire hallway. Like...
Even though we went to college together, like our college experiences were not the same. Just
That's very...
I don't know how to interpret that, but that's because I didn't know either of you then.
Yeah, I know. Very different. But we have a ton of questions, Ben. Do you want to like kind of work through any of them or?
Sure. Who do you want me to bring in?
I love John's question. I think that's good.
All right, John, it is. The famous John Bordeaux. The floor is yours.
Famous is a stretch. Thank you, sir. Senate leader suggested that states should simply go bankrupt or consider that as an option. And almost immediately I was reading things, I'm a layman here in terms of the law, that's not even a legal path. So I guess my question is, can you kind of dig through that? What is legal? What is real about the bankrupt option? And if so, does it really give the courts the ability to like restructure pension funds and otherwise second guess state budgets? I mean, where are we on this?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, I'm less of a lawyer than anyone else on this. So you guys feel free to jump in, but like, as it stands right now, states can't go bankrupt. There's no part of like the bankruptcy code that provides for state bankruptcies. States
Those cities can.
Cities can and have. States can become insolvent and like not be able to pay their bills, but they can't, there's no mechanism for like a structured bankruptcy. I mean, could Congress create that? Sure. And I think what he was hinting at is if you create that, then maybe you can do things like cut pension liabilities or whatever else, you know, but to me, like, this is something that has been, I think like ideologically, like sort of a wish of the far right for a long time. And I think it's not going to happen and it shouldn't happen. Like, look, at the end of the day, states are spending money to address the crisis. States have lost revenue. You can measure how much revenue they've lost. The federal government has the ability to print money. States don't. And if the federal government is fine supporting airline companies and cruise ship companies and whoever else, they should support states too, at least for the duration of the crisis. And that's a better solution than, you know, having massive cuts to services and employment in the middle of a recession.
So most states are not allowed, not only can they not print money, they're constitutionally barred or statutorily barred from running deficits. Is Rhode Island one of the small number of states that actually is allowed to run a deficit, or do you guys have to close your books at the end of every year?
So we have to pass a balanced budget every year. And so, you know, right, like if Congress doesn't help us, then the next fiscal year, fiscal 21, we could be running a deficit, you know, well into the hundreds of millions of dollars. We would have to pass a budget this June with hundreds of millions of dollars of either cuts or tax increases, like under our Constitution. So, you know,
in other words, you can run the deficit, but you have to account for it in the subsequent year and pass a budget that would address it?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so we have to, next year's budget, we have to pass a balanced budget. And in order to end with a budget that's not balanced, the legislature would basically have to vote to do that. They would have to vote to accept the deficit. Otherwise, they would have to find a way to, the administration would have to find a way to close it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
No, very much so. So we are going to take a very brief break from the gloom and doom of state budgets and ask about physical injuries. Joel Woodward, the floor is yours.
Sorry, it took me a moment there to get unmuted. So I'm noticing a curious bandage on an index finger. Is there a good story with that, or?
Charlie bit me. I'm just kidding.
Well, there you have it then.
Oh, hi, Joel. Yes. Well, I think this finger is trying to leave the group. It's like staging a coup and trying to off itself so that it's not part of my left hand anymore. It's,
This is the same finger that got 4 stitches the other day.
yeah, the stitches are right there on the knuckle. I had like sliced through my knuckle about 10 days ago and got 4 stitches. And then yesterday I was chopping garlic while on the phone with one of my students and giving him free legal advice. And just, well, I won't go into it, but I don't have much of a fingernail on one side of my, on this finger anymore. And I consulted with an ER doctor that I happen to have been on this show, perhaps. And
you should have done it on the show. We should have had a special episode. Kate gets emergency medical attention.
yes, okay. Well, we can do that next time. I don't think many people have the stomach for that. And also I might have like almost fainted trying to change the bandage this morning. So like, I don't know how much good TV there is if I just turn completely white and kind of keel over. So
I'm excited for it.
Seth would watch that. Seth's like,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like we're all like, bring it on.
so
Yeah.
just for that, Seth, I'm sharing this picture.
Yeah.
There is
See,
a.
this is dangerous now. This could end badly.
I
for
know
both
this
of
would.
us.
I'm throwing down.
Yeah.
You approved of this. This is a picture of Seth and I at 20 years old as babies. That's.
I gotta say, Seth is recognizable.
What?
Seth is recognizable. I am having trouble seeing you in that picture.
Well, that's because I'm disguised as a dinosaur, Ben. I was going as a
I was gonna
dinosaur.
say.
It's a really good costume. Yeah, I don't think I look like that anymore. Anyways, that's us as at the RISD ball, I think our junior year. So in like 19 years old.
So our next question is from Michael, aka the Big Blue blogger. And Big Blue, I assure you, I have saved you for last, apropos of your very kind message that you wanted others to go first because you've gotten a lot of airtime recently. So feel guiltless about posing your question.
Thank you, Ben, and I do appreciate getting more airtime. Seth, I hope you'll forgive me for bringing up Hillary Care. I know you were barely out of diapers at the time, but your family does know a good bit about expanding access to health care and some of the associated political challenges. I was wondering from your current position, how you read the situation at both the state and federal levels, and whether the pandemic might move the needle either way on Medicare, Medicaid, or single payer?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it has to, right? I think a couple of things. So first, something that hasn't been talked about a lot that I think is interesting is when Congress expanded unemployment benefits in the CARES Act, they made unemployment available for the first time to gig economy workers and self-employed individuals, contractors, people who typically aren't eligible for unemployment or for other employment-based benefits. And to me, that's sort of a recognition that the employer-based system of providing benefits, whether they're healthcare benefits or unemployment insurance or retirement, the employer-based model doesn't make as much sense in today's economy. Right? You know, this isn't like it used to be where you go and you work at the factory and you work at the same factory for, 40 years, and that's where you get your health care and that's where you get your pension and that's where you get your whatever. I mean, we live in an economy now where people are changing jobs all the time, and a lot of people fall into these categories like gig economy workers that didn't used to exist in the past. And so this was the first time, to my knowledge, that Congress like proactively made this large group of people eligible for a benefit that they weren't eligible for before in unemployment insurance. And it's only temporary and it's only during the crisis, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, that was an acknowledgement that the employer-based model for the kind of the security net is not the wave of the future and is not sustainable, right? And so does that mean that we're going to have single payer healthcare tomorrow? Probably not. But I do think that the crisis could continue to nudge us along in that direction and provide more fuel to the, sort of the movement toward not only in the healthcare space, but in other benefits as well, like in the retirement space, a social safety net that is more inclusive of categories of workers that aren't included now, essentially.
I'm kind of super interested in something which is just kind of, so I think that obviously I think that like then there was this huge need for like this lockdown, at least initially. There was absolutely not this kind of collective uptake at the beginning of March to get people to take the virus seriously and to take precautions. But just like as a public official and someone who deals with I don't know how you want to answer this, but it's up to you. But like, how do you think that you think that people can follow instructions and like maintain social distancing and we can reopen the economy? Do you think that there is do you think that there's like something about putting the fear of God into people by really putting us on lockdown that like is the only thing that's going to keep people safe right now? And I don't mean to be paternalistic about it, but I think that there's been a certain amount of undeniable paternalism in kind of in the policies that are taking place right now. I'm just kind of very curious what the conversations are like when people are talking about how to institute new policies of like social distancing going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to how it's been elsewhere in the country. Like in Rhode Island, I think by and large, people have done a pretty good job of adhering to the guidelines. Like not universally, but by and large, like people aren't going out much. Like there's a lot less car traffic outside my house than there usually is. When you do go out, like people are wearing masks, people are being careful. Like I think by and large, like it's actually like I've been kind of heartened by how quickly a large number of people have adapted their behavior. We're a little bit worried about what's going to happen when the weather gets nice. Right. Especially being in New England, it's easy to stay holed up in your home when it's like cold and crappy outside, which is, only like 7 months a year here. But then those other 5 months are coming up. And so, we'll see. But I think.
But didn't you hear that sunlight is the best disinfectant for the COVID virus, Seth?
I mean,
right after drinking a pint of vodka?
Yeah. But I mean, it's like, I think it's starting to set in though that even as things like can start to open up in some ways, like we're not really going to get back to normal for a long time. And I think that's psychologically very hard for all of us to wrap our heads around. But
for what it's worth, I was 100% wrong about this. Like I remember driving through Providence and waving to you, even though you couldn't see me because I was on the highway.
Yeah,
and it was dark.
So once again, you were driving through Rhode Island and you didn't call me.
I know. Sorry. There was a crisis happening. Also, like shortly after I passed through Rhode Island, your governor like stopped allowing like New Yorkers to come through Rhode Island and wouldn't let people through with license plates. So I got through in the nick of time.
Yeah, this is revenge from 2003, Red Sox Yankees. You remember that one?
I do remember.
Finally get to New Yorkers out now.
Yes, it's true.
So how is Rhode Island government functioning at the senior levels? I assume you're not getting together. Are you going into an office at all? Are you is it basically like every other complex organization? It's functioning by Zoom meeting? Like what's the structure by which the elected officials of Rhode Island are actually operating?
And follow up to that, which is like, are you guys more concerned about like information security and like security of like all of your stuff than like you have been in the past?
So yes to all of that. So other elected officials and other kind of high-level officials in Rhode Island and I, we talk almost exclusively via conference call. And, although to be honest with you, like a lot of our conversations were by call before as well. Like it's just faster, right? Like even before.
It sounds so nice to be on conference calls instead of Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm just like so sick of performative, like
Yeah.
on a Zoom meeting for hours.
Yeah. So, in our office and in the state treasury, 80% of our staff is working from home now. And I go into the office probably a day a week. And, I'd say like the elected officials and I, like, we're in touch with each other more frequently than we were in normal times, for sure. I mean, it's interesting. It's like, we're all busy and we're all as busy or busier than we have been in the past, but it's a different kind of busy because there's no events to go to. There's no, ribbon cuttings or press conferences or like fundraisers, like the politicking is kind of on pause. And so it's still busy. It's just different.
Well, that brings us to a really good pivot point, which is that if the politicking is on pause, what are your elections looking like?
Yeah, so we originally had our presidential primary in mid-April. It's been delayed till June, and we're going to try to do a predominantly mail ballot election.
Why not female ballot?
And we'll see. Oh,
see what I did there?
Look at that. I did. It's the dad jokes. That's good. And we'll see how it goes. We're hopeful. I mean, we're not a state that has a strong vote by mail tradition the way some other states do, but but maybe this will be the thing that changes that.
Is there a commitment to it? I mean, it's also not a state that has historically a lot of voter access problems, right? I mean, when you think of states with, access to polls issues, I don't think of Rhode Island as one of them. Is this going to be a rough transition for Rhode Island, or is this really, where the voters are, and there aren't that many of them, and there aren't that many jurisdictions, there aren't that many precincts, and so it's a relatively manageable transition, or is there some reason to think this is going to be very hard?
We'll see. I mean, again, it's uncharted territory. So we're the second most densely populated state in the country, and so I think that's why in-person voting was still very big here. It's just like, if you want to go to the polling place, it's a block away. Like no matter where you live in the state, your polling place is a block away, right? Because we're all piled up on top of each other. And so, I think it's good in a way that we had a later primary and that both the Democrat and Republican nominations are essentially done at this point. So this will be a good dry run for us where the stakes aren't very high, and a practice run for the fall, but it's uncharted territory, so we'll see how it goes.
And since Rhode Island is not a competitive state for purposes of the presidential election, are there major elections that are happening in Rhode Island? I mean, obviously the presidential election is a big deal, but it's also, the stakes for the state are relatively low since it's not being seriously contested. What are the major races that you guys are having in the fall, if there are any?
All local. So none of the statewide elected offices are up. We're not up this time.
When are you up? 2 years?
Yeah. Well, I'm term limited in 2 years. So I was elected in 2014, re-elected in 2018. Yeah, I'm glad you've been following, by the way.
Sorry.
Re-elected in 2018, and in 2022, I have to find a new job. So we'll see what happens. But
I have a research assistant position open.
Noted. But it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how campaigning changes like this year also, right? So like, for these local races in Rhode Island, it's very retail, right? Like the way you campaign for state legislature in Rhode Island is by knocking on every door in your district 4 times and talking to people and doing stuff in person. And like, I don't know if that's going to be possible this time. So it'll be interesting to see how campaigning changes. And it might be a situation where like incumbents are advantaged because the challengers won't be able to do a lot of the things that challengers normally do.
So if you were running a campaign right now and say you were on the ballot in the fall and you had to plan for a social distancing friendly campaign, what would you be thinking about as the modality of outreach that, I mean, obviously you're going to reach huge numbers of people in lieu of fun, but that wouldn't be an adequate campaign. What would you be focused on?
Very challenging, right? I mean, and like you can see campaigns struggling to figure that out. Like Joe Biden right now is struggling to figure out how to run a presidential campaign from his basement. And so I don't know exactly.
He's welcome, by the way, anytime to come on.
Well, so this is what I was going to say next. Even before the crisis began, one of the things that I've been watching that I thought was interesting was sort of the Pete Buttigieg style of media outreach, right? Where his philosophy, and he lost obviously, but I think he overperformed significantly, like outperformed expectations significantly,
wildly
right?
Overperformed. Yeah.
And part of like early on how he did that, I think, is their philosophy was, we will do an interview with anyone, anywhere, no matter how big, how small, or how crazy they are, right? And so, early on, whether it was big stuff like Fox News or CNN, or like random podcasts or random YouTube shows or whatever, like they would just say yes to everything, which like a lot of campaigns, especially at that level, don't do that. A lot of them tend to be very cautious and like only want to put their candidate in front of friendly interviewers and that sort of thing. And so I do think that like this virtual campaign might make that approach more common, where it's like, all right, you can't do events, you can't do rallies, you're sitting at home, you're literally going to go on every single show and podcast and whatever you can find, even if you're not really sure what it is or how it's going to go. It's also sort of the Anthony Fauci approach to media too. Like he's everywhere, right? And like there's a strategy behind that. And so, you might see other campaigns showing up online in places that they wouldn't normally in the past.
I was also going to mention that one of Seth's claims to fame at Brown was that he was the president of the college Democrats, and so obviously besides like being,
which was the right-wing organization at Brown, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. I was only part of the college Democrats for the free steak. I just want to be clear.
Yeah, I went to Oberlin, right, where there were college Democrats in the same way that there were, there was like a, I don't know, it would have been like having a Rotary Club at Oberlin. It was so not part of the culture of the place.
I would say that the culture of the Dems was like so many people at Brown were liberal, but like the Dems were political, like, right? Like that was like kind of like the thing. So like it was about like the people that like, and I would almost say, I always describe this kind of as my upbringing too. Like, I think that we came up, Seth, I mean, you came by politics, honestly. I mean, I did a little bit too with my parents, but like, but also we grew up in this era of like the West Wing and this kind of lionization of like government is like, and federal government is a solution to like, to so many ills. And the idea that was really like the way forward. And so that was kind of, I would say, the idealism. And I would say like only like a few generations behind us, became a story about technology and big tech.
So wait, we have breaking news. My phone has just interrupted me to say that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un makes first reported public appearance in 3 weeks, state media says. That is all I know, but he is apparently not dead. And
or he has like somebody that looks like him. Doesn't he have like 3 people that look like him that wander around?
Like I report, you decide. There you go.
Beth, do you have people that look like you that wander around just in case someone tries to off the Rhode Island treasurer?
Who would do that?
No.
No. I will say though, Kate, I know we're running low on time, and because you broke our non-aggression.
No.
This is, I believe, Mardi Gras 2009.
Oh my God, you're the worst.
That is awesome.
Bring this other innocent person's face so that I don't even know who that is, but
I don't
think
know
it's
who.
an
Where is
alligator.
this? Is
Is
this Mardi
alligator?
Gras?
Yes, it's Mardi Gras.
What was that? What is going? Okay, well,
Yeah.
that is
so,
you are a terrible person.
Thank you.
Never
for having
inviting
me
you on
the
any of
show.
my shows again.
I love this. I think Kate, we're gonna have
I'm like
to,
bright red now.
we're gonna have to like use this as one of our backdrops. For...
No, absolutely not.
And we can talk afterwards. I can hook you up.
Yeah, no. I think like a
The
rotating set of pictures of Kate is what I need for my Zoom background.
Thank you so
Seth.
much, all of you.
This has been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for having me.
and please, if we need a GoFundMe for the state of Rhode Island, let us know. We can sort of tweet it and
We know
get it
people.
going.
Someone with 1.6 million Twitter followers was harassing Ben today. We bet he could drum up some attention for Rhode Island.
Well, I've been showing, like, I hope you've enjoyed the like the tourism pitch that I've been making throughout this. And so when things do open up again, come visit. You can take the show on the road. You can
Well, the show is going to end as soon as when we go back to work.
So when
This
the
the whole
fun begins again, doesn't this look fun?
It does. We will. We can have like a live event, but it would not be in lieu of fun. It would be actual
fun. Come have fun in Rhode Island,
but
not for a
Seth,
little while.
Seth, what is going on with the Bristol parade?
That's a sore subject right now. So
sorry. Tell everyone what the Bristol 4th of July parade is.
So it's not just a parade. It's Bristol, Rhode Island has the oldest continuous 4th of July celebration in the country. They've been celebrating every year since I think like 1781 or something like that. Have never missed a year. This year there cannot be a parade. I think they're trying to figure out a way to do something instead to like keep the streak going, but it's tough. Bristol it's an awesome town, most patriotic town in the country.
The lines, the double lines on the streets are red, white, and blue
I should have
stripes.
I should have had a Bristol background. So
yes, you screwed up.
Yeah, so it's tough, but we'll find a way to celebrate and to be patriotic from a safe distance, I'm sure.
And until then, we will please come back and join us. Kate, do you have a sign off for today?
I do, in honor of my finger injury and I now know who it was, but it was an anonymous gift of a knife in the mail, which is like, seems like the last thing I need. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Just that I flinched a little bit.
Send Kate sourdough starter, send her, whatever kind of
special butter,
prosciutto, special butters, tomatoes to grow in those things. You don't send her knives. Come on.
Yeah, that's like it's like you could send me finger cuts. I really need something.
Send her bandages.
Bandages. That was actually funny because I had to go and get gauze through the window at the pharmacy, and the lady was like, "Do you want nonstick gauze?" And I was like, "Who wants the stick gauze? Like, who wants the stick gauze that sticks to your wound? Like, why is that a thing?" And then she gave that to me. I didn't even look at the box until I got home and put it on, and it stuck. And it was terrible. Anyway,
excellent.
The sign off for today is a quote from Zora Neale Hurston in honor of my injury. "No, I do not weep at the world. I am too busy sharpening my oyster knife."
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent.
And that is also in honor of the Rhode Island guests that we have today.
So join us tomorrow at 5. We will have live from the cabin in the woods. We will have Yasha Monk, and
Does he have the baby cannons?
The baby cannons are there.
Can he fire them for us?
I wouldn't trust Yasha to load a baby cannon.
Okay.
I've never taught him how.
I'm going to tell him you said that.
That's fine. I'm fine with that. So until then, remember, if you can't have fun, in lieu of fun, you can still come and hang out with us.
Bye, Ben. Bye, Seth.
Take care, guys. Thanks for joining us, Seth.